would come within close proximity to another ship or to the ground. So the color, the hotter the color, the more risky the areas are. And there's a spot off the separation scheme off of Neah Bay. But then also, you can see this is where things get really exciting. And what we did was looked at under high, medium, and low rates of increase. And we have a specific component to this model that will look at Gateway's projected numbers. But the numbers we had when I did this were not anywhere as big as the current numbers are proposed. So we're going to have to update this model. And this will be coming loose just within the next month. There's the 5 years for the Army Corps to complete the EIS. We'll soon be able to get this story put to bed. Now, we're concerned about oil spills. We're concerned about biofouling. We're concerned about air emissions and things like that. But the fish themselves, like I said, you have to bring out your inner herring here. When you look at a herring, they're rather big-eyed fish. And when fishermen go fishing for herring, typically they bring in a big light and they draw the fish to them. The folks at BP used to say to me, well, if our dock is so bad, why do they spawn on our pilings? And I thought about that for a while. And I go, well, but they're not supposed to spawn on the pilings. They're supposed to spawn on the grasses. And what I believe is the case is that the light is an attractive nuisance. It brings the fish to where they aren't supposed to be. But also, they're subject to, so like when a dock is lit up at night, you have this attraction, which also brings in predators. When a ship comes in, if you see a cruise ship go by, it's, every day is Christmas. But the other thing is that they're very acoustically sensitive. The hearing of the fish is the lateral line, which is the schooling fishes use to keep together, are connected right to the inner ear. So noises are something that they're keenly sensitive to. So like tug maneuverings and docking evolutions and things like that could be major sources of spawning. And most prey, when everything eats herring, they have a very paranoid lifestyle. It's because they're always looking at, are you going to eat me? You're going to eat me? And so when you hear a noise, you're going to like, oh my God, I'm out of here. So anyway, so noise is becoming more and more of an issue in the marine environment. Understanding noise, from the ambient noises to these various different progressions of noises, ship noises, and you know what the biggest noise in the ocean is? Anybody know? Rain. Got to stop that here. No, but it's just one of those things that it's pretty ubiquitous. But Navy sonar is obviously a big one out there. But ship traffic in this area, just so oftentimes we don't realize this. Vessels coming into the Strait of Juan de Fuca, half of them hang a left going to Canada, the other half go right. The ports of Seattle, Tacoma combined are the third largest port complex of all of the United States. The Port of Vancouver is the largest port of Canada, period. When you take the third largest in the US and you add it to the largest in all of Canada, Strait of Juan de Fuca is one of the busiest waterways in North America, by far. So it's not trivial when you add a significant new factor into an already busy waterway, and especially when they need to transit some of the most backwater, narrow passages we've got with hard shorelines that go bump in the dark. All right. One of the things I also learned was that actually there was a researcher that was studying herring with the fish tanks, and like one of his graduate students come in and asks his professor to excuse himself. And I go, what are you talking about? Well, you have gas or something? It turned out the herring were passing gas in the tank that was audible to the graduate student, that it appears that herring actually make noises. So this is the first time that they may use this as a communication device. They're saying, one of my ex-fisheries professors found in Prince William Sound that they actually go to the surface and gulp air, and maybe to refill their swim bladder. But this is kind of funny stuff. Most people don't know anything about herring until you start looking. So noise might be even getting in the way of herring communication. But this is an interesting study done by UBC, which is just recent. I'm almost done, I promise. The summary we heard before from the League was fantastic. This one map, well, one chart, tries to say, when you think about any new proposal, it doesn't occur in a vacuum. It occurs in the cumulative impacts of the world as we know it. So we've heard everything from the Mobile to the Intalco to the ARCO to when the Shoreline Act to the Whatcom outfall going in, Sacro fishery, Tosco, all these different proposals And then we have the big oceanographic events going on between the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, and then there's El Niños in between. And lo and behold, I've heard some people say, well, like the herring are like boom and bust economy. There are some good years, some bad years, and they just keep on coming up and down. Well, they do oscillate, but it's all in one direction. And so I don't see this as being an oceanographic signal, but the death of 1,000 cuts. So with that happy note, I appreciate it and look forward to answering any questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Fred, very much. That was certainly more information than I was able to take in about herring, but I appreciate getting a broad overview. We're going to hear now from Jean Milius, former County Planning Commissioner Chair. She's an associate professor at Western Washington University, where she teaches courses on land use and environmental law. She's also a partner in the Nossaman LLP law firm, which does quite a bit of work on land use and environmental law. And I want, before she starts, I'd like to encourage all of you to think about asking questions. Raise your hand so you can get a card. Betsy is here in the maroon vest, and Jeremy back in purple, so we can get them up and start answering questions after Jean finishes.
That's fine. The grand finale of Whatcom County. Thank you, Lynn. I would guess that I was invited to join this panel because I've been involved in some local planning issues, but my perspective on this project, and particularly on that inevitability issue, really derives more from my experience outside Whatcom County. Lynn mentioned that I'm a partner in a law firm and has a very significant infrastructure practice. So over the past couple of decades, I've been involved in a number of big infrastructure projects, multi-million-dollar infrastructure projects, billion-dollar infrastructure projects, working on regulatory issues and environmental impact statements. And what I found is that some projects that nobody thought would ever get through because they went through environmentally sensitive areas, because they were so heavily regulated, have gone through after all. And some projects that had the support of everyone from the governor on down, that the project applicant spent millions of dollars and years of work to put through, actually haven't been built. So to anyone who thinks either that the Gateway Pacific project is a done deal and there's nothing that anybody can do about it, or that there's no way that North America's biggest coal terminal will ever be built on and next to an aquatic reserve, I just say that there's a long road ahead of us. And whatever happens is going to be based on some combination of the merits of the project, its environmental impacts, the position of the regulatory agencies, the law, and, of course, politics. And politics is all of us. Now, when it comes to local politics, there are all sorts of issues we could talk about, and it's going to be interesting to hear what questions people will come up with. What I want to talk about just for a few minutes is the exchange of information, what information citizens, the public, is entitled to, and what citizens need to do to make sure that this process is done right. And so I'll be kind of expanding on some themes that other people have talked about during the course of the night, including that first really critical element that people keep talking about, the environmental impact statement. For the public, that's the part that comes first. It comes before the county decides whether it wants to approve the project, or at least it should. And so it makes sense to talk about it first. The environmental impact statement process is really a great thing. Yes, I know you're excited. You've been sitting for over an hour. Yes, I can't wait to hear about environmental impact statements. It's a really great thing, though, when it's done right. Because when it's done right, first of all, it's the main way that we have to bring science into our decision-making. What will happen to air, what will happen to water quality, what will happen to herring and their flatulence, what will happen to noise, what will happen to wetlands. The environmental impact statement should be our very best, our definitive source of solid information on those issues. Second, it's a way to bring local expertise into decisions. I've seen a lot of circumstances where local people know about plants, about wildlife, about traffic issues that the consultants don't know about because local people live here every day. And also, it's a way to make sure that nobody does assume that a project is a done deal that can't be changed, because environmental impact statements have to look at alternatives to the proposal, and they have to look at mitigation measures or changes in the project that will reduce any environmental problems it might cause. Now, what I would love to see here, and what I hope that we do see, is SSA, the project applicant, saying, we're going to do this right. This is a big project. It spans half the globe. Let's look at it all, from mining coal in Wyoming to transporting it across the country to shipping it out of Whatcom County to burning it in China. You know, I guess some other people want that too. Cradle to grave analysis. Because what we look at will determine how we weigh this project. Now, as a few people have pointed out during the course of the evening, there are a couple ways that you can think about environmental impact statements. You can say, well, these statements relate to permits, so we'll just look at the impacts of the permits. The county's just granting permits on the shoreline and the upland part of the project at Cherry Point, so we'll just look at the shoreline and the upland at Cherry Point. Or you can look at causation. You can say the permits are going to allow the whole project to happen, so we need to look at the whole project. Now, getting back to the county actually has an important role here because the county carries out our state law, and our state law thinks big. State law says that the whole project has to be evaluated. For example, our state handbook about how to prepare an environmental impact statement says this, and I quote, "A large proposal involving actions in vastly different locations, such as material being mined at one site, then transported to and processed at another, is another example of defining the entire proposal. Appropriate environmental review would look at the impacts of all the related activities." Still quoting, "It is important to remember that actions are related if they are dependent on each other, so that one will not happen without the other." Now, the county knows this. A meeting memo from April 26th of this year says the county, quote, "wants to ensure that all appropriate project impacts are identified and evaluated. Commodities in addition to coal will need to be evaluated. Transportation is a key review area for greenhouse gas impacts, which include rail and shipping into and out of the project site. Setting the boundaries for evaluation is a challenge. SEPA requires disclosure, that's the State Environmental Policy Act, requires disclosure of proximate impacts, which may include impacts outside of the state border and of the 3-mile ocean limit." So the county knows that it needs to look at a larger scope than just its permits. What can we as citizens do? Well, we can help the county do the job that it has to do. We can say, yes, we are entitled to know about impacts outside the project site, and yes, we believe that these impacts are important. We can say that first before the environmental impact statement is prepared. People have talked about scoping, happen in a few months. And we can say it again after a draft report has been prepared because there are public comment opportunities both times. And what's more, we can say we want those impacts to be mitigated. People have mentioned mitigation a lot. Mitigation means, and again, quoting from the state handbook, the avoidance, minimization, rectification, compensation, reduction, or elimination of adverse impacts to built and natural elements of the environment. Mitigation may also avoid monitoring and a contingency plan for correcting problems if they occur. So Whatcom County has the authority to require mitigation through its environmental impact process. Interestingly, the county also has the authority to require mitigation through its permit process. So Whatcom County is going to be processing 2 permits. One will be for a shoreline permit called a substantial shoreline development permit. I'm not going to go into that. It has to do with the settlement. There are a lot of people here who know more about it than I do. The second permit's interesting, though. It's called a major project permit. It's not used much. It's for projects over $5 million and of a certain size. Major project permits first go through the hearing examiner. If anyone's interested in what that means, we can talk about that later. And then ultimately winds up before the county council, which makes the decision on it. Now, what's interesting about these permits is the criteria for approving a major project permit. So the county has to find this project, and I'm quoting from the Whatcom County Code here. will not impose uncompensated requirements for public expenditures for additional utilities, facilities, and services, and will not impose uncompensated costs on other property owned. So when we talk about who should be paying, our county code says that the permit shouldn't be approved if there are uncompensated impacts. Okay, going back to the code, will be appropriately responsive to any environmental impact statement prepared for the project. Another reason that that environmental impact statement and its scope is pretty important. And then still from the county code, in addition, the county council may impose any reasonable conditions precedent to the establishment of the major development as may be required to mitigate impacts of the proposal on the natural environment of the county, and to protect the health, safety, and general welfare of the people of the county, consistent with policies for environmental protection set forth in the comprehensive plan. So, what we need from the county and its state and federal partners is enough information so that we can really know what the impacts of this project will be. And we'll have to help them do this job by insisting on this information. I actually know the two local contacts for the environmental impact statement at the county, Tyler Schroeder, and at the Army Corps of Engineers, Randall Perry. I know them because they've both been students in my classroom. And the last time I said something like that, the person I was talking to looked at me and said, "Boy, you are old." Be that as it may, I know that they're both smart, I know they're hardworking, I know they want to do things right, and we need to help them to make sure that they can. And then we need to make sure the county knows that this project has to meet the requirements that the county has set. It can't be approved if it has uncompensated requirements for public expenditures, it can't impose uncompensated costs on other property owners, and it has to show how it will protect the natural environment. Now, none of this is going to happen overnight. We're not talking about next week, next month. We're talking over the next year, the year after that. But the price of democracy is constant vigilance, and of course, a project that's going to have impacts on several generations merits our attention over the next few years. So thank you very much for coming and for paying attention.
Thank you, Jean, and thank you for the reminder that it's all of our job to be making sure that this project gets done in the way that's acceptable to us. I'm actually going to, I've got questions sitting here, and so we'll get started on questions. I'm going to read one of the statements first, or the comments, and then we'll go on to the questions. I've been reviewing the questions, trying to make sure we get ones that are probably of biggest consequence up front. We won't be able to cover all of them, and I'm flipping through looking for the statement that follows well. Thanks, Jeremy. Jean's remarks, and after that we'll go into the questions. So this comment says that this project will affect our grandchildren's grandchildren into perpetuity. Fast-tracking the EIS is unnecessary. Much more time is needed. So I would second that, and I'm trying not to add too much of my own opinion here. I apologize. So we have a number of questions about trains. So this first one is sort of this big question, and then I'll ask a few of them and let the panel members respond to just the questions about the trains in general without asking each one individually. Is the message that trains are inherently bad, regardless of cargo? Would we rather have trucks and cars on I-5? Is this a solution to greenhouse gas emissions? If the railroad, so next question, if the rail line was moved to the Acme Valley, wouldn't Mount Baker Highway be blocked for a large amount of time each day? Let's see. How come we are not getting straight talk about rail route this project intends to use? We've got a couple of these South Fork questions. I'll have more of those in a moment. Do you intend to say, to Mayor Pike in specific, do you intend to say yes to coal and route the trains through the South Fork instead of Bellingham? And I am going to let you guys answer those without adding too many to the list. So why don't we start with Mayor Pike, since there was one specifically directed to you?
Sure. Well, first I'll start off by saying it's not a question of whether I can say yes or no to coal, frankly. the railroad has the right to ship the coal. What I want to do first of all, as I said, is get the questions on the table of what are the impacts and how are they going to be mitigated, or is the proponent proposing to mitigate them, and what are the alternatives that should be examined in the EIS. And the question ultimately of whether or not the project makes sense, I think, should be answered after we have the answers to those questions. I think there were a lot of good questions about not just the transportation issues, but environmental issues, about jobs issues, about economic benefit, economic cost issues. So I want to make it clear I'm not taking a stand either for or against coal. Those are very complex questions that frankly have to do with national policy a lot more than local policy. And what? Well, thank you. I'm actually just telling you the way the things are. I do not have...
Okay, please, can we leave the mayor to speak, and you can submit questions on cards.
Anyway, you're entitled to your opinion. The question about what the impacts are of trains going up the Acme Valley as opposed to up the coast route, there's a couple of different things there. One of the questions was, what does that do to the Mount Baker Highway? Well, one of the mitigations. That's why I said they need to look at the impacts of that route as well. One of the ways you mitigate that is you would separate either the railroad or the highway, and having one major road to do that on is a lot different cost than having all the roads that you'd have to do along Bellingham. So there's some significant differences there. But that is the kind of question that needs to be looked at. And let's see, there was another question about trains as well. So I don't recall what the third question was, but you know, I do want to touch on the first question. This is, you know, I mean, if we want to be insulting about having a discussion about what the pros and cons are, that's fine. You know, I think this community deserves, on both sides of the issue, to have a full exposure to daylight of the questions and a full understanding of what those answers are, and then make an appropriate response. One of the things that and I've expressed this privately to a number of folks, one of the things that frustrates me about this is I have a lot of friends on both sides of the issue that are cheerleading. And I don't think cheerleading at the end of the day helps us out. We need to look at the issues, and we need to make a responsible decision. And that decision I can make right now. I could tell you good reasons to come down on either side. There are people that are losing their homes because they don't have a job. There are governments that are laying people off. There are school districts, universities, states cutting back on expenditures because we don't have enough economic activity. There's also very real, very serious questions about the wisdom of subsidizing extraction of natural resources from public lands at public cost and shipping them overseas to people that are building stuff and then selling it back to us. So, you know, those are lots of things that we need to think about, but we need to be able to have that dialogue civilly if we're going to make progress.
Okay, thank you. This is one for the Sierra Club. What is your response to those who say China is going to get the coal anyway? At least if we give it to them, we'll have the economic benefits.
Well, I'd have to say that I don't fundamentally agree with that premise. We have the largest reserves of coal in the world, and so we are the top dog when it comes to this, and we can be a leader in the world for the future of our energy supply, and we're doing it right here on our own soil, and we need to make sure that we keep our coal in the ground. And I think that if you can constrain the market the way that we can, you will see people shifting from that market, because if coal is really hard to get, then it's not going to be seen as the best solution for China's energy needs.
So I'm going to jump to a regulatory question here, and I have to apologize. I am not going to be able to get to all these. I'm trying to pick the ones that I think have the most answerability not necessarily the least politically sensitive. Speaking of which, on what specific agencies and government leaders should we focus our attention on that are going to be the decision makers on this project? And linked to that one is another question. Are the regulations so lax and so badly enforced that a harmful project could get approved without sufficient restrictions?
I'll start a little bit, and I'm sure others have answers as well. There's a number of regulatory agencies, none of which are under the control of the City of Bellingham. But there are a number of folks that I think should be engaged. You know, I think a key entity to be engaged in the conversation is the Lummi tribe. Other tribes as well, because they're sovereign nations. They have their own interests and concerns about this, and they have different standing than most anybody else does. The fact is that railroads were given a heck of a deal and a heck of a lot of power in the 1850s when essentially they bought Congress, and they've retained that power ever since. And so I think in terms of local ability to exert authority over the transportation of the coal, it's very limited. The environmental impacts, you know, I'd say the state and federal department, well, the State Department of Ecology, federal EPA, the Army Corps of Engineers, the Department of Fish and Wildlife, those are some key agencies. I'm sure that Fred or Matt probably know more about some of the other agencies that could be engaged as well, or actually you would as well.
Well, I guess I would say that the two main agencies that I am most interested in are the Department of Natural Resources, which has the right to either approve or reject a lease at this facility. In addition, the County Council, your County Council, who we all elect, has the right to either approve or reject the permit that they will be asking for within the next year, 2 years. And one other thing, too, I think that I'd like to address that first train question real quick, because it was our presentation that really made it look like we were demonizing trains. We're not demonizing trains themselves. We're demonizing these trains for two reasons. One, there are no other trains like these out there. These are coal trains. They are huge, and they have massive impacts. The second is that it's coal. We are being asked to trade something here. The reason we're in a permitting process is because SSA is asking us to trade something, some level of damage for the facility that they want to build. Now the question is, why do they want to do that? And it's because there are a couple $1 billion a year to be made. Bellingham will get perhaps $25 or $30 million in wages. The rest will go elsewhere. So when we look at the commodity that's coming through, the trade we're being asked to make is all this traffic for a tiny percentage of what the profits are going to be. If we were actually looking at that traffic, because we in Bellingham were manufacturing things with jobs here that we're going to sell elsewhere, it would be an entirely different kind of trade-off, and we would be having a different conversation about the trains.
Okay. In addition to the issues discussed this evening, the questioner is concerned about the environmental and economic impacts from the release of ballast water as these giant ships load their cargo. Other ports have suffered from invasive aquatic species from Asian ships, and such species could destroy the fragile balance of life in Puget Sound and contribute to the demise of herrings, salmon, shellfish, etc. They're just asking for comments on this and how it might be best addressed in the EIS.
Ballast water is comes under the heading of like biological pollution, and in a lot of ways it's worse because, like, you know, in the Great Lakes, when the mussels came into the intakes of the hydro plants and stuff like that, it's a multi-million-dollar maintenance nightmare. It also allows for other species to be you know, kicked out of town that belong here first, and so. The problem is that there's been a long and drawn-out process. What's the best way to manage ballast? Part of the settlement agreement included requirements for open water exchange. Like I said, this is a current mitigation practice that is certainly better than a poke in the eye. But the idea that these massive ships, to be able to empty them completely and then refill them by the time they come to the dock, if it's really stormy out, they don't want to do that because they don't want to be bouncing around on the open ocean. The other thing is that these ships keep there's like a benthic infauna, like there's actually critters living in the mud on the bottom of these ships, so it doesn't get rinsed out with just the exchange of the water. So what it looks like the trend is going to be is that they're going to be treating ballast, and there's been some experimentation going on in Washington State. They originally wanted to experiment at Cherry Point, which, thank you very much, so you're like putting chlorine in there, or ozonization, ways that you actually are killing the bugs before you eject them out over the side. The question is what's the residual chemicals or the other stuff that's left behind when you go and dump this stuff over the side? So ballast water is a big bugaboo, but I was just in the course of preparing for tonight, this other thing about the outer hull, you know, there's a whole big thing with a recreational boater, you're supposed to make sure you rinse off your trailer before you take it to the next pond or bay to go in. These are big hulls to keep clean, and they are massive transporters of clingage. And so this whole sargassum that's come into Cherry Point Reach, this is almost definitely a likely transport via the hull of ships. So I think this will be a challenge no matter what the commodity is, but bulkers have a lot of mass underwater, so they are particularly ripe environments for culturing these invasive species.
What tax incentives do the project proponents expect to receive from the city, county, and state government? Is that a question that you can answer, Jean? Or Mayor Pike?
Well, I can only tell you there's none on the city level that I'm aware of.
Okay, so there's a basic, we don't know the answer to this question. I'm curious about this myself, but okay, so we don't know. How much of the coal will be mined due to fracking? Has anyone considered the cost to the Powder River Basin from the mining?
Right, fracking is for gas, but coal mining is really destructive to Montana and Wyoming. You know, we hear a lot about mountaintop removal mining because it's, you know, so iconic in the Appalachian Mountains. And, you know, in Appalachia, they're cutting off the tops of mountains and filling in streams and making prairies. And in Montana, they're digging dirt up and making mountains. So it's very interesting how we're doing it exactly. You know, we're creating the exact different landscapes in the areas that they shouldn't be. And this is bad for water, and it's bad for ranching land, and it's not good. It's going to be my general statement on that one.
And I'm just going to reiterate what you first said, because it was kind of quiet, that coal is not actually mined through the fracking process. Natural gas is. So in fact, it doesn't apply in this particular proposal.
Right, and it's used. They use strip mining in Montana and Wyoming.
And so a follow-up question to that is, would you tell us more about Peabody's environmental and human rights record, and Peabody being the coal company that's proposed to supply the coal here?
Excuse me. So for those of you who follow Newsweek, they rank all the top 500 or the largest 500 companies in the country every year. And you'll never guess, but in 2009 and 2010, rock bottom on that list was Peabody Coal. I can't speak to their environmental record in the Powder River Basin, but I just wanted to follow up on Robin's comment, which is that in the Powder River Basin, as coal companies finish with their strip mines, they are required to reclaim that land, what has been formerly rangeland or farmland. And at this point, only 4% of the finished strip mines have actually been reclaimed. So,
you know, I just would like to chirp in. You know, I understand. I've been reading the various ads that are running in the paper about the proponents of this project, and I know the SSA is a locally grown company. But you know, one of the things that we really tried to do in good faith in entering into the settlement agreement was to come up with certain studies that needed to be done ahead of time to make sure that we're making an informed decision as we move forward. And without fail, I mean, the basic you know, the fact that we're talking about renegotiating a settlement agreement with a partner that didn't do what we asked them to do in the first place. So we don't have the basic information that we were supposed to have to be able to make an informed decision now, but now they want to throw out the herring mitigation stuff in the hopes of realigning the dock or something like that. But the current application is with the current dock as it was originally proposed. And so, I mean, I just have a hard time people claiming to be green. It's like BP, you know, it's like until you see what their record is, it's sort of a, it was a very, very surprising to me that SSA came to me as a, they were saying, we're a very responsible company, but they did not live up to any of their obligations. So just FYI.
So this question follows a little bit on the regulatory aspect of what you just said, and I'm actually going to read a few questions because I think they fit in the same group. Has the Department of Natural Resources come out with a report on the impacts, environmental impacts of the current proposal? And why is the environmental community reneging on an agreement that stated that in exchange for the creation of a wildlife preserve, and I'm assuming they mean aquatic reserve, a pier would be located at Cherry Point? And then one more. Isn't it disingenuous of the environmental movement to be protesting? Oops, this is the burning coal question. Let's leave that one alone. Let's stick with the proposal and the environmental regulation. Great.
Just one part of that I can speak to is the question of God, it's like it just jumped out of my head. The deal was not that you get to build the dock if we get an aquatic reserve. That was never the deal. They fought the aquatic reserve right up until the last day, so including that letter I just put up there. So that was not the deal. The deal was, the most important part of the deal was that only one of the two docks get to go forward. So most of the NGOs that were at the table just wanted to say, look, if we're going to have a dock, let's just make one dock is better than two. That was basically the biggest part of the settlement. Then there are the nerds like myself who are interested in, you know, the biological systems and the operations of the dock and knowing better how to work in harmony with the critter that are there. And those aspects are, like I said, were the aspects that weren't done. But it wasn't a quid pro quo for giving up on the settlement to get the aquatic reserve, but to only get one dock. The one dock, though, had to be constructed under the settlement agreement's various environmental mitigations, which we thought were more robust than we could get out of doing an environmental impact statement. And in fact, I guess they were because they didn't want to do them. But to suggest that this was some deal that we're going back on, they're the ones that went back on the deal, for sure.
Okay, thank you. There has been a limit.
I was going to say something.
Oh,
Someone
sorry.
asked about whether DNR had made any comments on the current proposal. The comments I'm aware of came in response to an initial application, and DNR on April 6, 2011 said, DNR looks forward to receiving the updated biological evaluation, essential fish habitat evaluation, marine current and tides, marine sediment and water quality, nearshore, macroalgae, hydrology, geotechnical, stormwater management, noise impact analysis, vessel traffic, and other studies, as these will provide necessary information or evaluation of impacts to habitat from the proposed development on state-owned aquatic land. So I think that the answer from DNR is, we can't do anything right now because all of this information still needs to come into the record.
Great, thank you. There's been a limit on the size of supertankers allowed into Puget Sound. What has happened to this size limit, and how do the Cape ships measure up?
Washington State and U.S. Supreme Court Arco v. Ray, Washington State restricted the size of tankers that could come into Puget Sound as 125,000 deadweight tons. Arco sued the state of Washington, saying states can't affect the design of ships. They were right. And so Warren Magnuson leaned on Brock Adams, who said, let's write a rule, a federal rule, and they can't box with the feds. So, so 125,000 deadweight tons is the largest tanker that can go east of Port Angeles, but Cape ships are twice that size. Again, mostly in girth and depth. and they're not tankers, but the Cape.
Your mic's off.
Test 1 2. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Maybe not as good. So
Nope. I don't know what you're doing, but.
the coal ships are twice as big as the tankers that are allowed to call in our waters.
Okay, so Fred said the coal ships are twice as big as the tankers that are coming into our waters.
But they're not technically tankers, which is, so that answers the question of why they're allowed, because they're not a technically
Okay,
tanker.
thank you. All right, so I've got a couple questions now about jobs. What proposals do you have, thank you, to create jobs in Whatcom County that are acceptable to the opponents of the coal port? And who will invest their money in your proposal? And the last one that I had was, what will the impacts of this project be on the farming and agriculture in Whatcom County?
I'm going to, just because I didn't mention it earlier, I do want to say that we are actually going to construction with the rebuild of Central Avenue this year, which will allow redevelopment of the waterfront to start once we find some appropriate partners to work on that with. So there are some things happening on the waterfront this year that will allow for some additional job creation in that area, as well as there's all kinds of things that are going on all the time. But I don't think anybody at this table is in a position to create jobs. And I think that is a legitimate question about, when you look at the benefits and the costs of this particular project, the benefit is there is somebody willing to invest a lot of money in our community. And as I said, we need to weigh that against the costs of what it does to our community.
Okay, we're going to have one directly for Jean, and I'm sorry, I've got so many coming up here. I'm having trouble tracking them. You might be able to notice. Jean, when you say the county doesn't, doesn't something the decision, okay. Doesn't the decision fall to the county council? And which county council members will face election before this decision is made?
Probably all of them.
Okay.
Well,
Right.
it all depends on how long it takes for the decision to be made. We know that there are 3 county council members up for election this year, and they are Sam Crawford, Barbara Brenner, and Tony Larson. And who knows? So those 3 and possibly some others. With the county process, I think it's also important to understand that the county executive is another person who has influence over this. He is involved in policy, and he's the boss of the people who are doing the planning decisions. I was just reading a memo of a meeting he had with some people from Washington State, and in January it says, from that meeting, Mr. Kremen noted that today there is broad-based support for finding an appropriate way to proceed with the project. So I think that people who are interested in the project also need to talk to the county executive, whether there is or is not broad-based support at this point. The county doesn't even have an application in, so there should be plenty of time for the county to make that decision based on information.
Great, thank you. I've got a number of questions here. I'm going to try and synthesize them. This might be a good one, about coal and green energy and the larger issue of us exporting coal while going for green energy, supposedly here. So this question reads, isn't it disingenuous of the environmental movement or people to be protesting the burning of coal in China when 42% of the power generated in the United States comes from coal?
No, I don't think it's disingenuous. I think that it requires us to have our house in order. Yes, I don't think that it would be fair for us to tell China that they can't burn coal to bring millions of people out of poverty while we do it to power our iPods. I definitely can see that it is fundamentally insulting. So what the Sierra Club, along with lots of other groups across the country, are actively working to make sure that we're not burning coal into the future. Sierra Club's goal is to end all coal burning in America by 2030. So we know that we got to stop it here, and we are making strides to do that. But all of our work will be for nothing if the coal is shipped to other countries. So it's a simultaneous process. We need to get our house in order, and we need to make sure that the emerging economies of tomorrow don't do it on the backs of the future generations and our children.
There was a question earlier about creating local jobs, and I just thought of a nexus between this question and that question, which is there has been a local wind power company that has been stymied in its efforts to even look at the question of installing wind power facilities in this county. And so one of the solutions that we have to have if we're going to not rely as much on coal is to allow at least examination of other opportunities, which in fact would create local green power and local good paying jobs. So I would encourage you, because ironically the people that are opposing looking at some of the wind power questions are the same folks that say property rights trump over everything except when their neighbors want to look at the possibility of putting up a wind power plant next door to them. And by next door it's, 1,000 feet away from them or something. It's not like right next to their house. So I would say you might consider talking to your county council members about at least allowing examination of that question.
I have one more comment about that, and I think it's incredibly important to this debate as well, and that is the cost of coal. And people talk about coal being dirt cheap. I encourage you all to take a look. We'll post it to the resources website. There is a recent academic article called The Life Cycle Accounting of Coal. And what it shows unequivocally is that coal is costing us a lot of money. It is subsidized. It is subsidized not only by the federal government, which is your tax dollars, it's also subsidized by environmental externalities, which include health impacts and the costs both to miners, people who transport it, and people who live within range of coal combustion facilities. So anybody who's out there who's interested in market mechanisms, one of the things that I, as an environmentalist and also somebody interested in markets, I would love to see those subsidies removed from coal so that all the different renewable energy sources that we care about can compete on an even keel.
Lynn, could I just add something to that? I definitely agree with the fact that the externalities of coal are not accounted for in its price. And I just wanted to highlight that the Environmental Protection Agency is trying to rectify this, and a lot of the they're putting forth a lot of new policies on coal so that we can get the true cost put on coal. So coal is going to get more and more and more expensive. And it's thanks to strong leadership in our EPA. So I just want to give a shout out to the EPA.
This is a question to me. This is my big chance here. Were representatives from SSA invited to participate this evening? And if so, why did they not participate? And they were not invited, and partially because we obviously have quite a few panel members here with a lot of information, and there's only so many people that we can include. We are planning another one, as I mentioned earlier. We would like to have representatives from labor there, as well as medical profession, to talk about a little more in depth about the health impacts, and some of the project proponents from SSA as well. So it wasn't through their lack of interest, it was from our inability to fit them in. This is one for Jean. There's a little quote here about the fact that you mentioned the county major project permits may not impose uncompensated impacts. And they go on to say, when a person dies from cancer due to inhaling coal dust, how will that person get compensated?
Well, realistically, when we talk about mitigating and compensation, we're talking about the impacts that are predicted with some level of certainty at the time that the environmental impact statement's prepared. So in the event that the project went forward, we would hope that those mitigation measures would be sufficient to prevent the person from dying from cancer. Realistically, you know, in the event that there are emissions and they are proven in the future to cause someone to die of cancer, I think it's pretty certain that they wouldn't be compensated.
Coal leads to 4 out of the 5 leading causes of death in the world. So there's definitely a strong connection between illness, death, and coal. And I think you're right, nobody's getting compensated for that.
Thank you. I had a comment here that the impact on farms was not adequately answered for some of the attendees here. And I don't think we're going to have a chance to do that this evening. Again, it's one more thing that I think we'll want to talk about more, but we've only got so much time. So I appreciate your comment, and it's not that we don't think that that's important. Let's see. There's also a question, there's a lot of questions about train routes and routing of trains through here, regardless of whether we actually ship coal. And again, I don't think we're going to be able to get to all of them. I'm going to pick the one that I think probably is most succinct, and that is, how has the transportation impact of Amtrak been considered, and what would it mean in redesigning our train tracks and compensating to compensate for the frequent rail traffic?
The way passenger traffic is routed and prioritized is basically under a contract. So I doubt that it would actually have an impact on currently scheduled Amtrak service. But where the impact could be significant is on opportunities to expand that service over time, because it would take up more of the slots, is what they're called, more of the slots, time slots that are currently available potentially for passenger service. Amtrak runs under a contract with Burlington Northern on Burlington Northern's lines, though. So Burlington Northern has a lot of say about what additional services offered. Is this off? Can you hear me? Okay. Amtrak or Burlington Northern has a lot of say over adding additional passenger service. That has to be negotiated. If there's a greater demand for freight traffic, that means that there is less capacity for passenger service, and so there would be a greater cost to the public, because we subsidize Amtrak both at the state and federal level. The Washington state pays a lot of money to have the Amtrak service we have in the state beyond what the feds pay. And so, for example, when Sounder service was added between Everett and Seattle, Burlington Northern charged the state $300 million to agree to provide those round-trip slots that they currently have. So it can be very pricey. The more demand there is for use of those tracks, the more pricey it's going to be in terms of negotiating with Burlington Northern.
Thank you. And this is the last one. I'm probably directed at Jean, and I think she'll make some corrections. So the question is actually, what role does the Shoreline Commission play in this permitting process? Do you want to take that?
I think the question's referring to the shoreline permit, and that goes first through the county, and there is a possibility that it can get appealed on the state level, and I think that that's what the question's referring to.
I think so too, and I just wanted to offer that correction so that people understood what the actual process was.
So yeah, I mean, there is a possibility of an appeal, and then there's a possibility, and I expect the probability that it'll go past that into court on any number of issues. So there are various way stations along the way, and that would be one of them.
Thank you. So I've also had a couple questions about what can we do as citizens to ensure that this isn't a done deal, and I'm going to let that be answered by Joelle from Climate Solutions, and she's going to close the meeting out.
Okay, I get the last minute, and I just want to thank you for taking time out of your busy lives to be here. I want to thank our extraordinary panel members, and I want to thank you so much, Lynn, for all of your amazing work to pull this together. Just 30 seconds. I'm a 4th-generation Whatcom County native, And so I have a personal interest in this. This is something that, as they said, is not at all a done deal. I've been working a lot with the folks in Cowlitz County. They are very concerned about what they're trying to happen in Longview. And so so you know, you are in good company with folks in Longview, in Cowlitz County, and across the state, and across the region, and across the nation. And you are joined by businessmen and women, farmers, doctors and nurses and veterans, pastors and priests and grandparents and parents and students and young people who are very concerned about this and are going to work to the power of the people so that we can make sure that this does not happen. So if you agree with that, I encourage you to sign the petition at your table, to take the fact sheet and learn more, and also to call Governor Gregoire, to call Commissioner of Public Lands Peter Goldmark, to call the county council, and to call the county executive. So power of the people, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks all for coming. We will have the question sitting out on a table over here if people want to take a look at what some of the questions were that didn't get answered.